Well, maybe I will tell you what I do for myself, and then you will know what we can do maybe together if you have some interest. It's quite difficult to really say what you do when you do already many things. But the major thing is the studies of the Veda was for me the major thing. And I wanted to see the shift of paradigms from Vedic to Upanishadic and later to what I call Sankhyaic paradigm of Sankhya and Yoga and Darshanas. And actually Gita is already in that paradigm of mental structure of consciousness, if I would use Gibson's. And why I wanted to do that, I wanted to see the lineage, I wanted to see the development of the same thought. And Sri Aurobindo did this work, and he says it was the same Vedic thought was developed, or how to say, narrowed down or presented in different terms. First in the intuitive terms of mental structure in the Upanishads, and later in the mental structure of darshanas. And the Gita. Gita has completely mental language and deals with concepts. It's another type of, or another way of presenting the same spiritual knowledge. So what I found interesting that the Veda is, first I thought Veda was representing some kind of magic, mythical structure, even less mythical, more magic, more fundamentally archaic, again in Gibsarian terms. As Sri Aurobindo says, Veda belongs to symbolic age. But later I noticed that Veda is not totally archaic or magic only. It has very sophisticated and highly developed conceptual language. So language which is not fitting into the magic structure of, curses and all kinds of taboos, which we sometimes find here and there in the literature, in Atharva Veda, for example. It's another type, very highly developed, and I started to think what it could be really, where it comes from. And then I realized that actually Veda is presented to every Manvantara according to the Indian tradition. Every Manvantara starts with Satya Yuga and goes down to Kali Yugas, And these are Mahayugas, within which there are also Yugas. So it's like fourfold division within fourfold division. So it always narrows down to the physical perception, to the most physical and external, from the most, so to say, profound and symbolic perception of things, where the spirit and matter are one, and then they slowly are disengaged and discriminated, and finally they are presented as two different aspects of the same reality. And at the end we have only one, that is material objective, where the mental structure dominates. By the way, mental structure operates only within this objective perception of things, ourselves perceiving ourselves as objective entities. It's quite interesting. Mental structure does not operate totally and exclusively within the structure where there is spirit still present. But I will not lead you too far into that. What I want to say that the Veda was for me a puzzle, and for many scholars also in the West it is still a puzzle because they do not know how to deal with it. It must be some kind of Stone Age or barbaric origin of some kind, and at the same time it has the highest possible poetry available to us, to mankind today, with the most developed and sophisticated poetic language and poetry, chandas, of no comparison to anything which was produced later. So, how come? There is a contradiction to this barbaric beginnings and this highly sophisticated and developed mentality which is not exclusively mental, but has some other dimensions which our mind refuses to see. So, and then I understood that actually what Indian tradition presents is another perception of time and involvement of mankind, so to say. The evolutionary process is seen differently, not in terms of linear, as we see it today, that from the single amoeba organisms there were more and more complicated development, and finally we come to man, and man goes on. It's a linear way of seeing evolution, where we see evolution only from the perspective of physicality, of physical development, of physical instruments, which includes vital and mental. Mind is also part of this physicality. That's what Matthias was referring to, that when we deal with these instruments of knowledge, we are dealing still with Prakriti, and it can't be otherwise. So this way of seeing evolution is not presented in the Indian tradition. In the Indian tradition, it is seen from the point of view of the involvement of the group soul. And that group soul is called Manu. That's why Manvantaras, periods of Manu involvement. And who is Manu? Is the mental being. Mental in a Vedic sense, not in the later sense, the being which has the mind of free will. Aham manur abhavam suryascha. Just listen to this verse, what Vamadeva says. I became Manu, I became the sun. Manu, the sun. So, this higher being of this group soul, which every time brings some kind of plan how to get engaged with the manifestation, so to say. It's a fascinating view. Is presented in the Veda. So Veda is, every time new Veda is given to this period of Manvantara, starts with the most luminous knowledge of what is to be done, and slowly by doing it comes down to that point where it cannot be done anymore. There is no more energy to do it. The resistance of the darkness, of the inconscience, is so great that the resources are already exhausted. Kali Yuga, the end of Kali Yuga. Then Pralaya takes time, so the soul, group soul, disengages, withdraws, makes another plan, another vision of involvement, including all those perspectives and all those failures and all those impossibilities into the plan. New Veda, so to say, is projected and brought again into a new Manvantara. Why I'm saying all this, it's kind of mythological vision, but what is interesting about it is that since Veda is presented for the whole period, it must reflect all the structures of consciousness. And it is in a way very true. Veda reflects all the structures, including mental, the most mental development. And in that sense, it is integral in a way. Only we cannot see it because we are predominantly mental. And we are working out this mentality more and more, as Matthias said. We have to really have a, well-developed, sharp instrument with which we then, getting back all those other structures which we neglected by developing this mental and making them transparent and making them efficient within the mental structure, or together with mental structure, may have a glimpse of that what Veda was. And by the way, we started to see this slowly. Studying the Veda for several years in IPI, we started to see that it is more sophisticated than it looked like at the beginning. At the beginning it was like a religious literature of some kind, worshipping gods of different kind. But later we saw that
concentrate on what you can help them this project.
Right.
Not on the Veda, because you can do that.
Right. Since I do not know what your interests are, I was just giving you a picture of what my interests are. And of course there is much more to it, because all these devatas, all these godheads, they represent specific powers of universal consciousness. We can say that the Veda is the psychology of the universals, not of the individuals. It doesn't deal with individuals in a proper sense. It deals with the universal movements which are applicable to all individuals. And that's why it is, when we study Veda, it is dear to all of us. There is no religious preference of any kind. It's not a Hindu literature. It's not against any other Muslim or Christian literature or any other literature. It's universal in its approach, very yogic in its content or in its methodology, and it is far beyond everything we achieved on the level of spiritual realization. Far beyond. So far as we can say that, as Mother says about rishis, that they are basically involutionary beings. If we are all evolutionary beings evolving here out of matter into the spirit, these beings are not evolutionary. They came down with a higher knowledge, like avatars. Bring knowledge down for the humanity to have it, to remember what was the purpose of coming here, and to fulfill that plan. So we are fulfilling the plan of the Veda, whether we want it or not, whether we know about it or not. And that's how Sri Aurobindo says that the Veda was our beginning and the Veda will be our end. Everything is there, the whole plan. It looks like we are doing something else, maybe, according to our individual perception of things. But truly speaking, we are working out this projection of the group soul to which we belong. So the concept of time in the Veda was seen in cyclic terms, not in the linear terms, of the involvement of the soul and then coming out of that involvement. It's like we can compare it to the individual. Individual is born. First he is a child, everything is beautiful, symbolic age. And then he becomes more and more mental, more and more worried. Then he gets old, and then he leaves the body. In the same way, these cycles for the group soul were envisioned. That's why in Indian tradition, the names were never important. Copyrights were never important. There are hundreds of works of Kalidasa, and actually there are only a dozen works which are originally Kalidasas, but everyone wanted to sign with his name, forgetting his own. So this is the same applicable to the whole tradition. There was never a rigorous, historic, event-oriented linear structure, because that was understood as cycles of involvement of the soul. So what's the point of keeping that record of the names of the kings and when they were born? There was no point. The vision is much vaster. So if you are interested in that, in those beginnings of our psychology and psychology of the universals, you're most welcome, and we can do many interesting things together. Of course, Sanskrit, knowledge of Sanskrit would be good to have, but
I think that people who really want to do something that involves Sanskrit, amongst the five of us, Vladimir is the only one. Another person, two people who are very good in Sanskrit are Vinay and Anu. So they are also here to be consulted by anyone who wants to work on that one.
Yes, I sorry to take so long time, but I wanted to give you a kind of vision. If I would say only bits and pieces which are not related, it would not be very clear. Now you have a glimpse of what we are talking about. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
I don't know where to start from. and what I can do, I don't know really. I only consider myself to be a student, not a resource person. And as a student, I want to learn. I'm here to learn from all participants, from everybody who is here around us. And so what I can do as an introduction, and what I can do is that what I can talk is what I have done, and I can talk very briefly about my own journey, what I have been from where I came and how I came to Indian psychology, and what I am doing. Let me say it very in the beginning that I came to psychology from mathematics. That was my field of primary field of research, my field investigation, my study. And from coming from mathematics background to psychology, I was more or less working with the quantitative methods and the methodology of research methodology, which was my strong field of research and teaching and discussion and participation. And from that was my beginning of my journey in psychology. And later on, I moved to the area of, I would say, the belief system. Belief system is one of the that I was looking primarily from the point of view of the health belief system, that how these health beliefs work and how these health beliefs which we have lead to both it aggravates the crisis at times, it creates more problems at times, and at the other times they are beliefs which help us in recovering psychologically, socially and other way from the disease we are suffering from. And that kind of research began from my very personal experience, because almost 20 years back I went through a major surgery, and doctors were not sure whether I will survive or not survive. And I was in the hospital for a long time with spinal surgery. And I was studying myself. I had that kind of psychology background and that kind of orientation, that what happens when you become a patient and when you are totally incapacitated because of the surgery and because of all other reasons, and what do you feel and what do you think and how do you recover? And there I got this whole notion of how the belief system works and what it does. And that was the beginning of my research in the area of health beliefs, which I continued over a period of time, almost for 10 years or so. That kind of hospital research and other kind of research I continued, and that brought me into the field of slowly, gradually into the field of Indian psychology. Because when we talk of beliefs, we cannot talk beliefs in a very narrow sphere. We have to talk beliefs in the very larger domain, that what people believe in as a part of their own existence, of their own mission, their purpose in their life, what they are here to do, and how they look at their life vis-a-vis the others and surrounding and the cosmos and the metaphysical sense, how these beliefs function. Because for beliefs, it is not important that whether they can be proved or disproved. This is not the question. The question is that these beliefs, some of these beliefs which are core beliefs of the people, core in the sense that they define your existence, what you are, and what you are capable of doing, and what mission you have brought in this life. And there may be some other beliefs which are peripheral beliefs, I would say. These peripheral beliefs can change in life, but your core beliefs, very difficult to change. They define your existence. And I was looking at these beliefs and working with these beliefs, and like to look at the people's life, first in terms of the I would say positive psychology or hardcore data, in the sense of data, and later on I shifted my methodology, which was a big shift for me, from that to narrative methods, which are more in a kind of a different kind of orientation and different kind of paradigm. And that kind of work in which I was looking at what people think and how they develop. Whole idea was to look at the process part of it. that how people change in their life, what brings these changes in them in their life, and that became the focus of my research, my work in the later years. So I would say in Indian psychology, if you look at Indian psychology as we see it today, my journey is not very old. I maybe last say 7, 8 years or I'm in this particular field, and I've been doing work, and I'm getting more and more interested in this field. That looking at this human being as a mystery, and the kind of creation which is a creation which is part of a larger some kind of design. We don't know what that design is and why we are here. But every life has a purpose, and that purpose we are serving by doing activities and what we are functioning and we are doing here. And that with that conception in mind that we are part of a larger reality consciousness, as well as a separate unit, as an individual, we also serving we have some mission, individual mission in our life. And that kind of research which I am doing particularly, since of my interest in the area of research methods, I am more getting interested more in the area of methodologies, how we can develop new methodologies. Because we want to work in the area of Indian psychology, we cannot use the positivistic or third person methodology. We cannot keep on working other people and then develop a kind of psychology which we think that we understand the human beings. I think the first thing we need to do, as I understand, is that we need to understand ourselves. We need to understand what happens to us and what kind of methodology we can use, what we call as a first person methodology, to understand our own deeper inner layers of our existence. And that brought me to this kind of methodology of first person methodology, second person methodology, where we can work with the group, and the third person methodology which we are using for doing kind of research. So this is now is becoming my new, I would say, area of interest, that how and what ways we can develop that kind of methodology which can help us in understanding our own selves. And through understanding our own selves, we can understand the other people. And one of the area which I'm related to area is what I'm doing is what we call is the folk psychology. The people, particularly since my background was in the health area, that was became my another interest, that what happens in the traditional societies where folk practices, where traditional practices, where the belief system, how that works and how that helps in recovery of the people, how they bring them back to normal life or release them to develop and grow. That became my another area that particularly in the area of health, that what this kind of folk beliefs and practices work. So that is another area I have been developing. I have been working for last few years, and I have been writing in that area, and I have been doing research, because I see even in the folk tradition I see a large a kind of universality. Because I am looking at the other folk traditions in other countries and other cultures, and there is a remarkable similarity. From where this remarkable similarity comes, I don't know. Maybe because of some processes which are beyond our understanding, or which are of universal nature, we find this kind of similarities across, whether it is Canada, is USA, or this is Australia, Aboriginal tribes in Australia or other countries, Africa. There is that kind of similarity which is of another fascinating aspect which I am seeing, that universality is. So what I am looking at and what I see Indian psychology, I see it is as a kind of universal psychology, not a psychology which is a Indian it may be Indian in its origin, that it has begun from this subcontinent. But Indian psychology, the very term is a misnomer to me. We are using term Indian only for the sake of convenience, because there is no better term than Indian. But I see it as a kind of a universal psychology of human being or our existence in that sense. So that my vision, I would say my desire, my wish, and my dream is that if we are collectively, all of us are in that process of working together to develop that kind of universal psychology. I am just part of it, a small try in that effort. Thank you.
Okay, I will speak in a way that Ajit ji did, and he spoke about his journey, so I'll speak about my journey, and that way whatever milestones I've reached, whatever terrain I've covered to some extent, or have some understanding of, that will give you an idea of my interests at work, and maybe some of you have something, some interests in relation to that. For me, Indian psychology, I suppose, in a conscious way began when I must have been 11 or 12 years old, sitting with my brother's friend, who's 2 years older, sitting on the roadside and in the night, and looking clear sky, all these huge number of stars, and just wondering who I am, what this is all about. And of course, at that time, I didn't think that, I had no idea that this is a basic question in, for example, the Upanishads also. What am I doing over here? Who am I? And I guess most of us have that kind of a question, that kind of a yearning at some point or the other, earlier in life usually, but sometimes later. And that kind of a thing had been there, and made me very questioning, challenging teachers, parents, etc. And I think what has always been behind it is to try and understand why. What is this all about? Eventually, what is the purpose of it? Why should I do a job? Why should I get married? Etc. And these were serious issues, and debated over years, not just something on the side, about work with my father. 6-8 years, I think we engaged him on this issue. Marriage was more inside me. It was something which I had to. So basically, all these things, of course, brought me to psychology, and I thought that psychology has answers to these kind of issues. What is the purpose of life? What should I be doing with myself, etc. Or if I'm troubled by something, or if I'm depressed, these things seem to be dealt with within psychology. And so when I was, I started studying psychology formally back in 1984. And as I had mentioned yesterday, within the first year itself, first 1.5 years, I sure did find a lot of things interesting, and the curriculum was 99.9% Western in origin in terms of the models and theories which were developed, the text that we were using. It has not changed much even now. It's still probably 98% Western in Indian universities. I was in Delhi, and a lot of it was interesting and it made sense. But before that, I had lived in the US for a number of years, and I could see that the kind of issues, that the kind of concerns which these psychologists were preoccupied with made a lot more sense in the American setting, and often much less sense in our own setting. And so that's when I realized that there is some kind of a bias, a cultural bias. And this psychology, which is supposed to be applicable to all human beings, is perhaps not applicable to all human beings, more applicable to some and less to others. And at the same time, again, I mentioned yesterday, I had started reading some of the popular books on, for example, Buddhism, a little bit on the Gita, and specifically Buddhist ideas I found very useful. And there were certain problems that I was having, and I tried to practice some of these, something like, for example, you're unhappy with the situation. Why? Because of the expectation that you have. So where did you get that expectation from? So you can undo that, basically. You don't have to accept that. You don't. So over a period of time, you can loosen the grip of that kind of expectation. That applies to more and more things. So that kind of a thing. In Gita, there are similar ideas. So I thought that these are powerful ideas. They work, and they should very much be part of the curriculum in psychology. And so I discussed with some of my teachers, and I was told that no, this is not psychology, Buddhism or ideas from the Gita. I said, why? They said, well, this philosophy, number one. Number two, that means, of course, I was not clear, nor were they, what is the exact difference between philosophy and psychology. And the second thing was, it's not scientific. So what exactly does it mean for something to be scientific? So there is this asserting an identity of being scientific or acquiring knowledge through a particular means which is called scientific, which psychologists sort of are supposed to be using. Though I didn't find that kind of an approach being used everywhere. Some of the big names, I mean, that Freud eventually was not using that. He started out by using medical ideas, but he let go of that, a project for a scientific psychology. And Maslow said that his whatever he had discovered was far too fascinating to wait for verification through science, and he would in the meantime start exploring that. So many of the so-called softer areas of psychology, which are the areas which work, because the rest of the knowledge is largely quantitative through experimental methods, which is either confirmation of commonsensical notions, or to have some very vague kind of a relation to our life, has no direct everyday implication. There are huge, thousands and thousands of studies, experimental studies which have been done. So these softer areas are not scientific in that sense. So I was not quite convinced. And so I went on to take up these two themes. And I must say that it was difficult in the sense that it was not easy. At the same time, I realized that I was perhaps meant to do this thing. I found a teacher who would supervise some kind of theoretical research at the PhD level, where I was looking at this science question in psychology. And so historically, how the discipline developed, what do we mean by science? That took me to another area which is called philosophy of science. There's no clear cut, no formula or recipe that you do that makes your knowledge seeking endeavor scientific. There are a number of issues which in 2-3 days time I'll talk about that. So I looked at this, the history of Western psychology, the role of science, the socio-cultural milieu in the late 19th century, which played a major role in the shaping of the discipline. So I'm looking, this is all my PhD work, and this is from so I've done my MA in 1990, and this is from 1993 to 96. There are lots of gaps. After my high school, there was a gap of 1 year, after BA 1 year, after MA 2 years, we use this word gap year, and supposed to be a problem in India. But at least there's another issue that I took up with my father and others. Like, what do you mean gap year? I mean, I'm exploring, I'm trying to understand what I should be doing next or whatever. I'm still not convinced that I lost anything. I probably gained a lot in those gaps. So then in the PhD I did that, and there I was able to see that there was nothing in Indian knowledge systems which violates the essential spirit of science. When it comes to something which is publicly observable out there, and then maybe you can go on to measure, then when you are looking at subjective states, that's not possible. But in any case, many of those softer areas in psychology are dealing with those subjective states. And let me just give you one analogy. science, the basic idea behind science, and there are many controversies and issues which I will take up some of them in a few days. The spirit of science is that you stick your neck out and you make a claim that such and such thing exists. So there's a force called gravity, and then somebody says, okay, show it to me. Wait, I need to verify it. So you start dropping objects and you measure their acceleration, and then you say, well, 9.82 meters per second. And it's not just me, anybody can do that. So it's something which is available to observation. But if I change that observation to experience, something which is available to experience, then you can begin to include the subjective states. Then you say that, okay, now say for example, I ask you, how many of you have seen an electron or experienced an electron? I doubt it if any of you are going to raise your hands. But if I were to ask quantum physicists, they may say, well, not exactly seen, but yes, I have a sense of it, I have experienced it. And I say, okay, can you share that with me? You say, well, you'll have to study a lot of physics, you'll have to understand a lot of mathematics, and say, after about 12 years, you will begin to get a sense of what an electron might be. Okay? But it has certain properties, and it is being utilized in the technology, whether it is this light or the television or whatever. Now, if you have a yogi, and he says that, now again I ask, do you believe is there something like a samadhi state of consciousness? Right? We may not take it seriously, here we may. But the right question would be, show me. I mean, okay, you're talking about something, seems to be interesting, show me. So, okay, I said, you can't show it out here in a concrete way. But there are certain procedures that you can follow, there are certain practices that you follow. And then over a period of time, you begin to have certain experiences, and then you can see it. And others can also try it out, and they can also see it. It becomes available to their experience. And then you say, okay, but how long will that take? You just might say 12 years of serious meditation. So, it's not so different somewhere, if you begin to look at it. So I've been looking at these kind of issues. I wrote a little bit, a few papers around these in the late 90s, my earlier publications. This is more of what you would call theoretical psychology, philosophy of psychology. And my real interest, of course, was more in Indian psychology right from the BA days. And by about 2000, I began to feel restless. I had gotten my job in the university, and I actually ended up teaching things which I didn't believe in, and I couldn't do that for very long. I began to get very depressed. And then two things happened. One was that they say in the Indian tradition that when you're ready, I mean, there's no point in searching for the Guru, looking for the Guru. When you are ready, the Guru will come to you. So in 2001, September, I think, Sri Aurobindo and the mother came into my life. And that was my entry point into some formal aspects. But more than that, certain experiences which convinced me beyond doubt about the validity of Indian psychology. And I used that as a starting point, and then my mentor, PhD supervisor, had become the chairperson or head of the department, and he was overhauling the whole syllabi. So he asked me to develop some papers related to philosophy of psychology and then Indian psychology. So on one side, I was beginning to learn certain things and give me a chance to try it out. So what has specifically, though, at the level of theory of philosophy, I've tried to look at the larger framework. So my first paper in Indian psychology was titled From the Self with a small s to the Self with a capital S, an exposition on personality based on the works of Sri Aurobindo. I'd come here for 2 months. Mathesh ji had helped me get a scholarship, and I had stayed in the ashram. That was in 2002, August, September. And then I had written that, which under some pressure, that you've come here for 2 months, you're getting a scholarship from the ashram. There should be something concrete, that inner experience, and it's all fine. So I'm glad that I was made to do that, because that's the only way I write, and under that kind of pressure. Anyhow, so in broad terms, I've looked at some of the systems, and I've tried to understand the gist of the Vedic knowledge. Of course, that's a tall order, but anyway, I've tried to understand that, the Upanishads, the Gita, Buddhism, just the gist of it. And in Sri Aurobindo's system, in general, they speak of 3 movements. One is inward towards the soul, other is upwards to higher levels of consciousness, and the third is a kind of a descent of the higher force and subsequent transformation. So within that system, the soul element or psychic element is something which I was able to latch onto. The rest of it is mostly abstract for me, unreal, because I have not experienced that. But what the descriptions of the psychic, I could relate to some of them, and I realized that that is one very effective method in integral yoga to make progress. So I've largely been engaged around that. And for me personally, in my own life, I was struggling with issues of in relationship, emotions around relationships, specifically the emotion of love. And I stumbled upon bhakti at that time, and bhakti music, North Indian classical bhakti music and also Sufi music, was one of the most powerful teachers at that time. This is between 2003 and till now, it's ongoing, but 2003 to 7, 8, yeah. There I was looking at the poetry, more than that, listening to the music and the states of love that they describe. I mean, there was a point when I would say, as many of my students say, is this for real? I mean, is it possible to feel that kind of love? That it's so powerful, it's so complete, or it's all embracing. And I began to realize that no, there is something to that. And so that also I find plays a major role in healing. And I believe, I also feel that in the context of therapy, this posture of love on the part of the therapist may play a very important role, cutting across all cultures. Certain kind of self-work which may be very essential for the therapist. And Carl Rogers has talked about the posture of unconditional positive regard. What might that be? Not just regarding everybody positively, no matter what your background, no matter what you've done. This is not easy at all for most of us. And M. Scott Peck in his Road Less Traveled has talked a great deal about that. So I've looked at this, I've written a little bit on these themes. This is more recent. So psychic, its connection with bhakti, its role in healing. So this is very recent work or it's ongoing work. And just before that, looking at some of these larger frameworks, and also looking at their links with integral yoga. That also I've been sort of trying to see where there is a direct link. In some way, the other yogas can serve as a bridge to help one make progress in integral yoga. So with me, the personal and the professional is more or less one, which is good, I guess. But maybe not everybody thinks that way. So that's a rough idea. Try to avoid too many details, but some were necessary. Some more you will get later on. So, thank you. Yeah.
Well, I think we have only very little time left over, so wouldn't make it very long. My fields are education and psychology. Basically, I'm quite passionate about changes in education. We started a school and a teacher training because of that. And I think part of it is that when I remember my own years in school, I see a grey boredom with here and there a few things, and I didn't have bad teachers or so, but the fact was education is like this and you have to adjust. And I could, in school, have wonderful ideas on how the world should be, how it could be different, etc. And okay, thank God, he gave me reasonable good brains, so I could do that just mechanically, and for the rest, thought later, and that is why I started working in education, that there were so many lost opportunities. Then, at one time, India became important, and everything related to consciousness, realizing actually the idea that there is another world, this cannot be the whole thing, was slowly getting an answer in reading about India or Indian philosophy, etc. So slowly the idea that something in me could again start blossoming was a kind of yeah, like that. Something else is also there. Then, I told you yesterday, we came overland, and crossing from the Wagah border gives you a very different feel of India than when you land at an airport, which are more or less all over the world. No, it's not true. When you land in America at an airport, you feel a difference. When you land in Asia at an airport, you feel a difference. But doing it really from the border and then moving on is really a very big difference. So I think it's one of the matters of grace in my life that this happened. And then there was a very fast development in getting the opportunity of starting a school based on consciousness. And basically that is education. If we believe that Indian psychology or that India is, how to say, if it can be shared with the world, then it is the main, and I don't like to talk in differences, but we say consciousness is really, and the idea of consciousness is all pervading. And so we must bring this consciousness back in the classroom, back in our contact, but what is more important, also back in our attitude. If we teach only with our mind what is happening in a Western school, consciousness simply is not existing, because it is not something, we have been talking a few times about it, it cannot just be grasped with the mind. It is. So experience has to come back into the classroom, and all kinds of things that help to bring that experience to the foreground. Now, I can't talk long about it, but maybe it helps if for me, one of the shining examples has been the dialogue of Arjuna and Krishna on the battlefield. Arjuna is in a very difficult period of his life and asks Krishna for help, for advice. Now, what is Krishna doing? Does he say, yes, Arjuna, you have to do this, and you have to do that, and you have to do that, and then you get out of your problems? No. On the contrary, he questions Arjuna and listens to the answer that Arjuna gives, and from there he tries to formulate the next question, and the next question, listens to the answers in order to help Arjuna to reach, you could say, the highest possible or the deepest possible level of his consciousness. And from there, all of a sudden, Arjuna starts realizing the difference between what you could say, everything that happens on the surface, and what is really important in life. And from there, he can make, overcome his anxiousness, and sees again a new way of living, which has nothing to do with all our preconceived ideas, our moral notions, etc., but comes from a level that we would say is the self. Yeah? So from the deepest of highest. Now, the whole idea is that if we teach Indian psychology, then that self with a big S has to come back in the content and has to come back in our own life. So definitely becoming a teacher of Indian psychology needs work on ourselves. And also we have to help from there the students again to see that Indian psychology or consciousness is not something far away from this world, but can be totally integrated in life and helps us to live life from a very different poise, from slowly a poise where we are not dependent on circumstances, where we are not dependent on branded clothes or all the things that at the moment are almost stifling our lives to an extent that if you don't fit in this box, you are not really a good living person or something like that. Our surface nature has taken over to such an extent that we are very much busy with that constantly. So, and that is possible because of the Western influence in our education, where we constantly looking at the outside, and the objects, etc. So I think India has a tremendous role to play, because at the moment this way of looking ruins our earth. Our ecological problems are all part of this paradigm. We produce. Earlier, when you bought, say, a fridge, it was almost a fridge for life. Now, when you buy a fridge, in many of them, after 10 years, there is something so that the fridge doesn't work anymore. When you bought a watch for life. Your furniture was for life. Think what, at the moment, we do when we need every 2 years, or at the West at least, every 2 years you need a new car. So what do we do with, how do we deplete our resources, etc. Now, we cannot go too long into this. I have only a few minutes also, but the idea that Indian psychology and bringing back consciousness in the classroom will be a boon for humanity, that is basically something that has my whole heart. And so very practical, for instance, we have to help students to find a progressive balance between inner growth and outer action. We don't want them to become yogis and etc. Away from the world. This is one of the first concepts that we have to break through. But each one find a balance between inner progress and outer action, and try to help them to shift it more and more to the inner part, so that the outer action gets more and more suffused with that self, and the soul, that consciousness. That is basically, there are a few people sitting here that start doing that with 3 years old up to the whole school level, and the results are tangible. So it is possible. same in our classes, in for instance, all the subjects that we teach can get or can be based on consciousness, and you do it in a different way. And similarly so for us, if we start teaching Indian psychology, then not to have a mental attitude and not to make the subject matter an aim in itself. You don't teach it as learning these facts, learning like we actually do our normal psychology, which I think is also. We learn the things that about Maslow, or we learn the things about Piaget, etc. No, what I mean to say, if they are not an aim in itself, they are an help for self-development, for self-discovery, for self-finding. And if you try to do that with all the subjects, or with all the concepts, with all the concepts, a very different classroom. And you have a very different contact with the students. It becomes again, life comes back in the classroom. And what you try to do, that is that you take the facts and circumstances of life, because all these children, especially not children, students, I mean, they're constantly busy with peer pressure, with relationships, with other things, etc. So it is actually quite easy to bring consciousness back in the classroom if we address these problems and help them to see all these things as a means for self-development and from looking within, for self-observation, for knowing who I am. For once I know who I am, I can help others. And as long as I don't know who I am, it is very difficult. We talked, what did we say in the morning? Something like, you said something like that. Anyhow, for relationships, for anything, first knowing ourselves is very important for the value of it, the quality of it, etc. So, basically, my own difficulties, my own qualities. When I get closer and closer and deeper within, I will, in the morning we said, we will see the whole sequence of something. And as I see the whole sequence of something, I am not taken by surprise. I need not to pretend. I am, and I can be. And if that is what we help our students to see again, there comes a different youth into the world. And slowly, I think the world is really waiting for this at this moment. So psychologists can do a marvelous thing. And that is what, in case you would want to do something on syllabus or something on how can I teach it, on attitude, what are the do's and the don'ts. I'm happy to be a little instrument in that. All right. Still took 10 minutes, that was not the idea. Okay.
There is, at least here in front, there is a smell of samosas or something of this sort. So I'll keep it really short. You'll hear enough of me otherwise, so I don't need to say very much. Like Nilce, I'm very deeply interested in consciousness and in the way human beings understand themselves and the surrounding. And I think that at the moment, really all problems that we as individuals and as collective have are psychological. Technically, we can manage whatever we like to do. And our big problem is that we make a mess out of what we like to do. And so for me, the way people make sense, the way people understand reality, knowledge, feelings, emotions, meaning, how that develops in us, I find that totally fascinating. And the very fact that two people can see the same thing and see it completely differently, and how that is possible, and whether it is possible to come to a wider view that takes both these things into account, or when two people have a very different interest, or two countries for that matter, is it possible to get to a wider position that makes it possible to come to a resolution of that difference? And how should we go about that? These are the questions that really I'm very much interested in. So the key area in which I'm interested is cognition, knowledge, understanding, and also in how to make these changes in ourselves. In psychotherapy, what is it that actually works? Why is it that someone suddenly realizes that he can do something different than he'd done before? Or sees that something that loomed as a huge problem suddenly becomes actually quite solvable? What is that key transition that can take place? These are the kind of questions that really interest me. So, okay, you have seen there is quite a wide variety available, and all of you are there. So I think for these projects we should really all make use of everybody. And through your questions, through your sharing in the park guest house and so on, you will automatically get to know each other further. In a little while we'll circulate that note. Only 4 or 5 people have written actually an email with a short description of themselves. I hope more people will do today or tomorrow latest, so that we can send something meaningful around. And by all means, use everybody. We'll have a short tea, and then I think we can still be here for a little while, and you can talk to us, and otherwise you can get hold of us throughout the coming days. Yeah? So after the tea, it will be just an informal kind of gathering. And if you have something specific already to ask from Ajit or Sunit or Vladimir or Nilch and me, go ahead, that's what we are for. And if